Several years back, at the beginning of one of my spiels, I mentioned that Dick Stetler had one style of preaching, and Kendrick, who was here at the time, had another, and I had a third. The style that I use is known classically as ruminatio, rumination. That's what a cow does. It takes in the grass, it digests it a bit, it brings it back up, digests it a bit more, swallows it, brings it back up, until eventually all the nutrients are resolved. And so here we have my rumination. Last time I did this, I forgot to bring it. Actually, I couldn't find it. So it's been found. So if you're expecting me to answer great questions in these few minutes, or have a unified message, you should leave now. There are lots of things in the scriptures we heard this morning that I could talk about. The story of Joseph is one of the high points of the Old Testament. It's also rather long. We heard last week about Joseph being sold into slavery, and we heard this week about his being Pharaoh's right-hand man. There's a lot of stuff in between there. So when you go home, you might want to look at the end of Genesis. There's about 5 chapters there about Joseph. And so what we heard makes Joseph look like, a great-hearted, wonderful guy who just forgives and all that. When you read the story, you'll find out that Joseph was not exactly like that. I mean, he planted false evidence on his brother Benjamin. But in fact, all things eventually work out for good, as Joseph said in our reading. In the gospel passage, which falls into 2 parts, we have the first part where Jesus talks about cleanness and uncleanness, and that's addressed to the Pharisees. And it seems pretty obvious. What you eat, what you drink does not make you a bad person, but rather what comes out of your mouth, what you do with your hands, what you do with your life makes you unclean. Who can argue with that? In the second part of the passage we heard from Matthew, we have the story of the Canaanite woman who wanted Jesus to heal her daughter, her daughter, yes. This story occurs only in Mark and in Matthew. The Mark version I prefer, and we'll get to that in a couple minutes. We need to remember what happens in Matthew before this event. You may remember Jesus had already gained a reputation as a healer and as a teacher, and he needed some downtime. This passage always occurs in the summer when pastors are on vacation. I was ordained priest in 1982, and I think I've preached substituting for pastors 5 times on this passage, which occurs once every 3 years. So maybe that tells you something. Anyway, so Jesus is trying to get some rest. And he flees first to the desert, and the people follow him. And he tries a mountain, the people follow him. He tries crossing a lake, and the people follow him. He finally leaves the country, and the people follow him. Not only that, but this Canaanite woman comes and asks for his help. And basically what we hear Jesus saying, if we're listening, is, leave me alone, you're not my problem. That's not exactly what you expect to hear from the mouth of the Good Shepherd. Words, deeds, and intentions, in fact, visible to people around us. But what we are thinking is not. What we say often has more impact than we expect. Was this woman put off because the disciples and Jesus said, "Go away"? No, she wasn't. Some people learn very fast. What we say does have, indeed, a lot of impact. James, in his letter, tells us that the tongue is the most unruly part of the body. Despite its small size, it can make a world of problems. At the same time, it can also be a great blessing. What people do with what we say is often an interesting thing to observe. I remember once being in a post office in line to buy some stamps, and the person in front of me was very annoyed because we'd been waiting for a while. And he got to the front of the line and he did his transaction, and the postal worker said, "Have a nice day." And he said, "Don't tell me what kind of day to have." Well, I'm the next person. What should I say? So I said, "Good morning." And we did our transaction. And she said to me, "Have the kind of day you'd like to have." Some of us learn really quickly. Commentators on this gospel passage say that Jesus tests this woman's faith for her own good. Those of you who are parents have used that line, I'm sure. This will hurt me more than it hurts you, it's for your own good. But in fact, Matthew's intention is to contrast her faith with that of the scribes and Pharisees. They relied on fulfillment of the law, of tithing herbs and spices, putting money in the collection basket, and doing all these things that the law said. But the woman did none of those things. She knew that without Jesus, what she needed, the healing of her daughter, couldn't happen. And so she is persistent in what she does to follow Jesus and to ask him for help. How about our faith? How does our faith compare? Are we like the scribes and Pharisees, thinking that coming to church on Sunday and putting money in the basket is all we need to do? Or are we more like that woman whose faith was strong, her trust in Jesus was absolute? Do we trust in God, or do we expect that what we do and say will make everything wonderful? Do we acknowledge our sinfulness and our need for Jesus, our need for his grace and his help and his strength? Or do we rely on ourselves alone? If the latter, we're in big trouble. I mentioned that I prefer Mark's version of this passage, and it's because of one little phrase that Mark has that Matthew dropped. And those words are, "Because you have said this." Most of you know that I was in Germany recently, and as we were at the airport in Munich to come home, at the passport check, I said to the agent there, "Grüß Gott," which is the Bavarian greeting. I greet God. And he said to me in German, "Do you live here?" Because I have an American passport, of course. And I said, "Excuse me?" And after a few seconds, I realized what he said. He said, "Do you live here?" I said, "No, I wish." He said, "Good answer here." In Mark's version, Jesus says to the woman, "It is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs." And she says, "But the dogs still get to eat the scraps from the master's table." And in Mark he says, "Good answer. Your daughter's well." Jesus obviously liked repartee. One of the things I find fascinating about this passage is that Jesus is shown as particularly human. He's tired, he's exhausted, he's trying to find some rest and he's not getting it, and he's frustrated, maybe a little angry. I think this is a good point to remember because while I'm sure none of you have ever been angry, frustrated, I do get that way sometimes. And it's good to know that not only I, but Jesus himself had these issues to deal with. Preachers for a long time were told to finish with a poem. Well, you're going to get more than one, actually. This is a recent poem published in 1996 about this passage. He came onto this alien shore, this weary Christ. He looked to work no wonders here, just to take some rest. My neighbors saw him as a crank, a weirdo priest. I saw him as my one last hope to save my child, and followed him along the street with my face veiled. I needed to get close to him and would not yield. His friends thought me an unclean thing too foul to touch. They asked him to get rid of me, a pagan wretch. I flung myself down at his feet within his reach. He placed his hand upon my head. All heaven was there. I told him of my daughter's plight and felt his care. He sent me dancing down the street, light as air. Hospitality is one of those things that is at the root of our Judeo-Christian heritage. You find passages in the Old Testament and the New Testament alike about how guests and aliens are important and need to be treated with dignity and love. In the Christian tradition, we have many examples of this teaching. St. Benedict, writing around the year 500, in chapter 53 of his rule says, "Let all guests be received as Christ himself." Do we do that? About the same time in Ireland, Bridget of Kildare, who died in 525, wrote a poem. And at the recent choral conference I was at, I was talking to a colleague and friend from Westchester in Pennsylvania who set this poem to music. Chancel choir members, be aware. I don't know where Ryan got the translation of this poem, which I absolutely love, but here goes. I should like a great lake of finest ale for the King of Kings. I should like a table of choicest food for the family of heaven. Let the ale be made from the fruits of faith, and the food be forgiving love. I should welcome the poor to my feast, for they are God's children. I should welcome the sick to my feast, for they are God's joy. Let the poor sit with Jesus at the highest place, and the sick dance with the angels. O God, bless the poor. O God, bless the sick. O God, bless the human race. O God, bless our food. O God, bless our drink. O God, embrace all homes. O God, embrace. As Joseph embraced the brothers who sold him to slavery, as Jesus healed the daughter of the Canaanite woman, so too we have been embraced and healed. And God calls us to do the same for others. As the Canaanite woman persisted in her quest for her daughter's well-being, let us pray also that the whole world may be gathered together before the throne of mercy for healing and wholeness, that we may receive the blessing of the greatest good, the amazing grace of God himself. Third poem. Would you open the black hymnal, please, to number 2236. We've sung this hymn a couple times, and I fear that the way hymns are printed, You never see the text as a poem. That makes sense. They're just kind of musical fillers. I would like us to pray together this text. Number 2236. Here in this place, new light is streaming. Now is the darkness